Ursula K. Leguin's sixth Earthsea novel, The Other Wind, there is an incredibly important set of what seem to be rather simple questions that are asked, and they're not really answered until the end of the work. They have incredibly important implications for all of Earthsea and all of the, we might say, rational creatures of Earthsea, the dragons on one side in the west, the Kargs in the far east, and the archipelagan Hardic-speaking people who use magic in the middle. And these two questions are coming from the former archmage Ged, who lives on Gaunt, who is there in chapter 1, and Alder comes bearing them when he comes to the court of the king, Lebanon, and meets Tehannu for the very first time. We have this interesting depiction. She put her hand to Alder in the manner of the people of Ea, and then Lades, as the others had done. But it was her left hand she held out. He touched his hand to hers, palm to palm. Hers was hot, fever hot. She looked at him again, an amazing glance from the one eye, bright, frowning, fierce. Then she looked down again and stood back as if she wished not to be one of them, wished not to be here. Master Alder bears a message for you from your father, the Hawk of Gaunt, the king said, seeing the messenger stand wordless. Tehanu did not lift her head. The glossy black hair almost hid the ruin of her face. My lady, Alder said, dry mouth and husky voiced. He bade me ask you 2 questions. He paused only because he had to wet his lips and get his breath in a moment of panic that he'd forgotten what he was to say, but the pause became a waiting silence. Tehanu said in a voice hoarser than his, ask them. He said to ask first, who are those who go to the dry land? And as I took my leave of him, he said, ask my daughter also, will a dragon cross the wall of stones? So Alder is coming, giving this message, which is not really a message. Instead, it's a riddle or an enigma, or rather, set of riddles, right? Who are those that go to the dry land? Then later, not in the same batch, but as an afterthought, will a dragon cross the wall of stones? Now, if you've read your Earthsea novels, you know that the dry land is the land of the dead that humans go to, or at least archipelagans go to. Perhaps the Kargs don't. They believe that they're reincarnated. But everybody else goes to this dry land, which Ged and Aaron know quite well, although they're not happy thinking about it. The wall of stones is the border that separates the dry land from, or part of the dry land at least, the part that the dead have to stay in, from the land of the living. And who can actually cross the wall of stones? We know that mages can, but that it's pretty dangerous business, and you can wind up trapped on the other side, as happened with Thorian the Summoner. When he came back, not all of him came back, as we know from previous stories. So these are some really central questions. They help to provide a reference point, a focal point. And they go on in this passage. The dry land, the king said, and the dragons. His alert gaze went from face to face. Come, he said, let us sit and talk. Perhaps we could talk down in the garden, said the little gray-eyed woman, Tenar. The king agreed at once. Alder heard Tenar say to him as they went, she finds it hard to be indoors all day. She wants the sky. And they're finding out about Alder's story, and they're not going on necessarily to those questions. A little bit later, what we're going to find is Tehanu is going to say to the king, I'm sorry, I have to be alone, sir. I will think about what my father said. I will try to answer what he asked, but I have to be alone, please. Lebanon bowed to her and glanced at Tenar, who went at once to her daughter and put an arm around her, and they went away in the sunny pool, the sunny path by the pools and fountains. And, what do we know about Tehanu? Well, we have this really great passage where Tehannu is actually talking with Alder, and she says, "Oh, if I knew what she is, I'd tell you," her voice full of grief and love and bitterness. "She's not my daughter born, as you might have guessed or known. She came to me a little child, saved from the fire, but only barely and not wholly saved. When Sparrowhawk came back to me, she became his daughter too, and she kept both him and me from a cruel death by summoning a dragon, Kalessin, called Eldest, and that dragon called her daughter. So she's the child of many and none, spared no pain, yet spared from the fire. Who she is in truth I may never know, but I wish she were here now, safe with me." And Tehanu is trying to sort this out on her own. Tehannu would like to be able to help her with it, but she can't actually help her solve these riddles. Later on, however, we find that maybe others can make progress. Tehannu speaks with the princess, and they talk about dragons there in the Kargish lands. And the dragons there are different than the dragons of the West. They're little things that don't speak and don't appear to be rational, but they're a sign of something important, of the possibility of rebirth. And they talk about that, and this is in the council meeting. And she says, "In her, at her, there are dragons, small, wingless, they don't speak, but they're sacred. She reminded me that my people don't go where your people do when they die. The dry land that Alder tells of, it's not where we go, the princess and I and the dragons." Lebanon's face changed from wary reserve to intense attention. "Ged's questions to Tehanu," he said in a low voice. "Are these the answers?" So maybe that's the way to solve this riddle. And Tehanu says, "I know only what the princess told me or reminded me. I'll speak with Tehanu about these things tonight." So they're still trying to sort it out. They still don't have answers to these questions. A little bit later yet, there's another discussion of this, but this involves more people. Tehanu is discussing the matters with Lebanon. Alder, Onyx, and Tehannu are there as well. And it begins here. Tehanu, the king said, he'd sat down beside Tehannu in the deep window seat, "I didn't call on you in council today to speak of the questions Lord Sparrowhawk asked you. It was not the time. Is it the place?" Alder watched her. She considered before answering. She glanced once at her mother, who made no altering sign. "I'd rather speak to you here," she said in her hoarse voice, "and maybe to the princess of her at her." After a brief pause, the king said pleasantly, "Shall I send for her?" And Tehanu says, No, I can go see her afterward. I haven't much to say, really." So she's been thinking about this entire time, but she doesn't have that much to say. "My father asked, who goes to the dry land when they die? And my mother and I talked about it. And we thought, people go there, but do the beasts? Do birds fly there? Are there trees? Does the grass grow? Alder, you've seen it." Taken by surprise, he could say, There's grass on the hither side of the wall, but it seems dead. Beyond that, I don't know." Tehanu looked at the king. "You walked across that land, my lord. I saw no beast or bird or growing thing." Alder spoke again. "Lord Sparrowhawk said dust, rock." Tehanu then says, "I think no beings go there at death but human beings, but not all of them." Again, she looked at her mother and did not look away. Tehannu spoke, "The Kargish people are like the animals. They die to be reborn." Onyx says, "That's superstition. Forgive me, Lady Tehannu, but you yourself." Tehannu says, "I no longer believe that I am or was, as they told me, Arha, forever reborn, a single soul, reincarnated endlessly and so immortal. I do believe that when I die, I will, like any mortal being, rejoin the greater being of the world, like the grass, the trees, the animals. Men are only animals that speak, sir, as you said this morning." And then the wizard says, "But we can speak the language of the making. By learning the words by which Segoi made the world, the very speech of life, we teach our souls to conquer death. That place where nothing is but dust and shadows, is that your conquest?" Her voice was not dry now, and her eyes flashed. So, to answer this question, who are those who go to the dry land? human beings. Human beings who have, in some sense, conquered death, but only by making death itself immortal and forcing people to live there as shadows, as mere names, without the connections that they had. Lovers pass each other on the streets, as we know, right? Nothing changes in this dry land. They go on. The king intervened. Lord Sparrowhawk asked a second question. Can a dragon cross the wall of stones? He looked at Tehanu. It's answered in the first answer, she said. If dragons are only animals that speak and animals don't go there, has a mage ever seen a dragon there? Or you, my lord? Onyx pondered only for a moment before he said no. The king looked amazed. How is it I never thought of that? No, we saw none. I think there are no dragons there. My lord, Alder said louder than he had said in the palace, there is a dragon here. And that is where the discussions end. These questions are going to run throughout. And the answers really do bear upon the connection between human beings and dragons and what it is that the wizards did millennia back within Earthsea. So these two questions don't get fully answered, or they get answered but in a kind of trivial sense. The real answer is going to come towards the end of the novel.